Open your cerebral cortex and shift your lobes into upper beta phase, because you are going to have Bitcoin knowledge transmitted directly into your vestibulocochlear. Your host at Bitcoin Knowledge is Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin advocate since it cost $0.25, but this is not intended to be investment advice. A doctor of jurisprudence, but this is definitely not legal advice. And an investor in core cryptocurrency infrastructure, including Armory, BitPay, Kraken, and Nitagio, but this is not a recommendation of those services. Here, you get fed via direct mind download with pure and free Bitcoin knowledge.
Bravo Tango Charlie Kilo, episode 101. This is all about wallets. Class 201, we have with us Andy O5. He's senior developer at Armory Technologies, which is the developer of the Bitcoin Armory wallet. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks, Trace. Glad to talk to you.
So in the previous episode 100, we had talked about private keys, public keys, a concept of entropy, cold storage, hot storage, network security, wallet security. So we're going to go into some of these concepts a little bit more in depth. And I wanted to start out with the root seed. So in Armory, what is this concept of the root seed?
Well, I call it the root key, and it's a key that you use to generate other keys. So one of the ways in which Armory makes security easy is we've implemented a feature called deterministic key generation. So given a root key, you can generate keys off of that will always be the same. So we have a chain of keys called the key chain, and it's not like a regular keychain that you keep your physical keys on. It's simply a enumerated list of keys that come from the root. So starting with the root key, we have a key at index 1 and 2 and 3 on up to however many keys that you need. And when you need more keys, because we suggest you do every transaction on its own key, not reuse keys for more than one transaction. Well, I should say more than two transactions, because there's going to be one transaction coming in and then eventually one transaction going out. So using any key for more than two transactions will have a incremental negative impact on your privacy.
Now, that when you say two transactions, that would be one transaction where there's an input, and that's where Bitcoins come into the public key, but
right.
Then also one transaction where there's an output, and that's where Bitcoins go from one public key to another public key, right?
Well, from one to more than one. In general, your outputs aren't going to match what you want to spend. So in the same way that you would go to a convenience store and buy a candy bar, if you use a $20 bill, you're going to get 18 something dollars back in change. And so that change also goes to a new key. So it's coming back to you. So what we do is we generate the next key in our chain to receive that change. And then that change will be the one input, and eventually that change will get spent on one output. So the key that we used for change then becomes a new key that has one input and one output, just like every other key in our wallet.
Well, and that's how Armory does it. Now, there are some other Bitcoin wallets out there that send the change back to the same address that it sent it. So
that's not as
privacy
good.
issues, right?
That's not as good for privacy. So it certainly is simpler. And if you're actually just buying candy bars and you're playing around with Bitcoin and no one cares about the amount of money that you're spending and you're just a regular person that's using Bitcoin for walking around money, then, well, no big deal. That's fine.
But there could also be a potential security problem when someone is reusing keys. I think it was one of the Android wallets where the private key could be deduced from one of the signed transactions because of a poor way that the private keys had been generated.
Well, that I'm not sure if that has anything to do with the reuse of the keys or just the poor entropy in the way the keys were generated.
Well, the reuse of the key. So when the transaction showed up in the when a transaction would show up in the network, you could, because it had a signature from the private key, you could deduce what that private key was. Only from the transaction in the network, which is public. And if you had sent the change back to that address, then, and somebody were able to deduce the key from that transaction, then they could, in effect, steal your change.
Well, the way that the private key signing works is that you should not be able to ever work backwards. If there's poor entropy, then there's going to be a particular kind of attack that will attack the poor entropy. So those two kinds of attacks are separate and distinct. I don't know if that was the case in the Android weakness, yeah. But I could be misinformed about that, and that's something that somebody else might have more knowledge about.
Well, and so that's one reason why it's good to always be using a new public key whenever your Bitcoins are coming back as change, or whenever you're sending them to somebody, is so that there's not that additional piece of information out there.
Right.
That could potentially be used in some way. Now, also, when Bitcoin Core or Bitcoin QT came out, when you backed up your private keys, it would only back up 100 of them.
Mm-hmm.
How is this root seed concept and how Armory has implemented it? How is that helpful so that you make sure that your Bitcoins are backed up?
Well, the thing about having deterministic key generation is you only need to back up one key, and then you can generate all of the keys that your wallet uses. So there is no concept of backing up a bunch of keys, and then once you use those up, then you have to back up a bunch more keys. That's not a sustainable system. No one's got time for that. You know what I'm saying? So this allows you to simply back up one key, and then that key is used to generate all of the other keys. Also, I want to put in here that we have a new version of this coming out soon where it's not a chain, it's actually a tree. So you have the potential to back up many wallets with one private key, rather than having the keys indexed by a single integer that counts up from 1 to whatever. You have now a vector of integers, such that you might have a key at index 1.1.1, and geez, that sounds a little bit like IP addresses. So yeah, that's about how these are indexed now. They look more like IP addresses, and you can actually have various organizations of your tree where one private key has a bunch of wallets, or you can have it as one private key has a bunch of accounts, and each of those accounts has branches, and each branch has various addresses on them. So we're taking this whole concept of deterministic key generation to a whole other level with the deterministic key tree. The details of this are actually described in a Bitcoin improvement proposal called BIP 32, and you can read and get in depth with that. And other BIP 32 key generation software is coming online as well. So that's going to be really the standard going forward from now on.
And it should be noted that Alan Reiner, our CEO there at Armory, he was actually very instrumental in innovating this whole hierarchical deterministic space, right?
Right. That's really the end point of deterministic key generation, is the ability to back up an entire system with one private key, so that you can have an exchange that you secure every private key involved in every user's account on your exchange with one super secure offline cold storage computer where you keep the keys to the whole operation.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, because there are additional attack vectors that come from like these parent-child key relationships. But you mentioned a phrase there, super secure cold storage. Like, what is this whole idea of cold storage? Because that's another thing that Alan innovated, right?
Well, yes. One way of doing cold storage is you write your key down on a piece of paper and you hide it under a rock. That is your super cold storage, because no hacker is going to be able to find your piece of paper. If they do, then they're not a hacker. They're a burglar. That's different. So the problem with that kind of cold storage is, well, whenever you want to access that private key and use it, well, then you've got to go find that piece of paper. And that's not very convenient. That's great if you have savings that you're not going to touch or you're going to leave for your children. That's not necessarily useful for anyone that's going to have a lot of transactions with their Bitcoin. So what Bitcoin Armory has done is allowed you to have all the security of a piece of paper under a rock and still be able to use your private key. And that's where the concept of a offline cold storage computer and an online watching only computer comes into play. So with Bitcoin Armory, we have our application such that it can be installed on both an online computer that has no private keys on it. So it has only the public keys. And those public keys are used to organize your Bitcoins and to look up their balances and to find out exactly what you can spend. And you can create transactions and you can broadcast transactions. So you can do all of these things except sign those transactions. In order to sign one of those transactions, you need your offline computer, which also has Bitcoin Armory running on it. And this offline computer has hopefully never touched the internet and can be a very scaled down, low-tech computer, perhaps an old laptop or one that you have cleared out all of the peripherals, all the Wi-Fi, maybe even get rid of the hard drive, because you can run this offline cold storage computer off of a USB stick. And again, that should be a USB stick that you haven't used for anything else. Should be acquired from a reputable source, and you should only be using it for this one purpose, because there are attack software that can be used to attack USB security. So you want to limit, like you said, the space of an attack, and have the smallest window possible for anyone to attack your offline computer. So once you set up an online computer with access to the blockchain and the internet, then you also have your offline computer, which is completely separate. The way a transaction would work is you would create it on your online computer, which has what's called a watching only wallet, and use that watching only wallet to create the transaction. you can put it on a USB key that's only used for this purpose, take it over to your offline computer, sign the transaction, because that's where your private keys are, and then bring the USB stick with the signed transaction back to your online computer and then broadcast it. Now, what happens is that private key signed the transaction, but the private key never, ever touched the internet. And that makes it much harder for an attacker to steal your private key.
Yeah, so we get all the benefit of the network security from the Bitcoin Core or the Bitcoin QT, but then we get to drastically shrink the attack surface and greatly increase the wallet security by using this offline cold storage device. And so, and like you said, it can be a cheap old laptop, or I think one of my buddies, he got a $200 laptop, and he's able to use that for his cold storage device. And so that's a great way to make sure that your Bitcoins are super safe and secure.
Yeah, another thing you can do on top of that is to use Ubuntu Linux on that laptop. And Ubuntu is a very basic, easy to use, bare bones version of Linux that will, doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles of other versions of Linux, and it's very simple to install. In fact, you can have the Ubuntu Linux and Armory software on a USB stick, and nothing is actually residing on the offline computer except for your data.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can be super secure. So it's not just the fact that you have this computer offline. It's also more, you can increase the level of security by running really basic operating system on it.
Exactly, because then, the less moving parts there are, the easier it is to secure those small number of remaining parts that are actually there.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, again, you're constantly looking at ways to reduce the attack surface. You'll never get it down to zero. There's always a way, especially when humans are involved. There's always a way.
Humans are very creative.
Exactly. And we're very creative in how we have weaknesses too. So we have very creative weaknesses. And so, ideally, the only way somebody should be able to attack your Bitcoins is somehow to trick you into sending them to them, because even that, you can reduce the attack surface for having somebody trick you into doing that. Because, if you use a multi-signature on top of this, then that would be having your Bitcoins secured with multiple keys, and that's going to be covered in a future podcast. But just briefly, when you do that, then more people have to be tricked.
Yeah,
right?
or more offline cold storage devices have to be compromised.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So further reducing the attack surface.
Yeah. So actually, this might be a good place for a joke that I've got. So I've got a really funny. It's a combination of a physics and a cryptography joke, and just to give our listeners some incentive to figure out the joke, because it isn't funny if nobody gets it, right? So on the podcast main site, so www.bitcoin.kn, there's a little orange button where you can start a recording. And so anybody who can explain the joke, we can feature it on the podcast. And so this might be a great opportunity for one of our listeners to, explain the joke and talk about their business or something like that. I don't know. Or maybe I can send some Bitcoins or buy a t-shirt or something. But anyways, so here's the joke. The colder the storage, the lower the entropy. And so if anybody can explain that joke, just go to bitcoin.kn, click on the orange button and record the explanation there. So while we're talking about this cold storage concept, you had mentioned a USB stick, and then you'd mentioned that, the USB stick could potentially be compromised also. And I know that we've talked about using different channels, like using an audio channel, for example, to transfer the signed and the unsigned transaction instead of a USB stick, or using QR codes. So there are lots of different ways that we could potentially transfer that data from the online computer to the offline computer to get the signature, right?
Somebody even had the idea of taking out and using old school modem technology. If you remember the kind of modems where you would have to take the receiver of an old style phone, like a rotary phone even, or what is a touch tone. It had to be a touch tone phone, right? And you would take the handle that you would hold up to your ear and your mouth. Remember that, if anyone who's over 30, and you put that onto this modem, which would actually have these two suction cup style things, and you would actually put the receiver on the modem, and then it was all audio, and it was really low bandwidth. I mean, certainly you would not send any kind of image content, much less video content, over this modem. You would literally watch text come in on this thing. But people have suggested using that kind of old technology to transfer transactions to and from an offline cold storage, because certainly there isn't any malware written to travel over such a old school modem.
Yeah, and it's 200 bauds or something. I mean, we couldn't even play Duke Nukem or Wolfenstein 3D on that, right?
I think that's prior to 2400 baud. I think that would have been and lower than that. But
I think that raises a very good point, that we can use these older technologies in a very security efficient way to greatly increase the protection that we have for our private keys, so that nobody captures our flag, right?
Right.
And because the USB sticks, they could potentially be compromised. There's been a lot in the news about that. How about printers? Nobody thinks of their printer as being the device that somebody could use to steal your flag. But we actually have a feature in Armory called Secure Print. So, why does Secure Print matter at all?
Well, if you think about it, Secure Print uses the oldest technology, which would be pen and paper. And the way Secure Print works is you go ahead and you print out your backup, but it's not really your backup. There is a Secure Print code that comes with it, and that Secure Print code is used to convert the backup you print out to your actual backup. And the idea is you print your Secure Print backup, which if somebody acquired your printer or there was a security weakness in your printer, they could look at that backup and never get to your Bitcoins. Because what you then do is you take the the paper that got printed, the printout, and you write your secure code on it with the pen, and the secure code is displayed on the screen. So as long as nobody's looking over your shoulder, no one will know your security code, and your security code will be written on the paper, so you can't forget it. And then that piece of paper that you have, which is half printout and half your writing, can be used to recover your private key.
Yeah, I think I'd seen a Reddit thread. Somebody was printing out their backups at Kinko's. And if people aren't aware, Kinko's, they actually keep a record of every single thing that's ever printed on their copy machines. And our printers actually have hard drives on them, right? And so and a lot of printers are Wi-Fi connected. So
you want to make sure your printer is offline if you're going to print it, or use Secure Print, because that Kinko's employee that discovers, hey, there's actual
Money.
Bitcoin private. There's money in our logs here. Let me go get that money after hours. Well, he's going to run into a printout that says secure print on it, and it's like, oh, I don't have the secure print code. Damn it! And he's not going to be able to steal your money.
And this applies to all the different wallets that you could be backing up your Bitcoins with, like whether it's Brain Wallet or bitaddress.org, or you're using these quote unquote paper wallets. Like, these attack vectors apply to all of these, right?
Right. So, using a non-secure printer, a printer that's online, is definitely an increase to your attack surface.
Yeah, I actually my printer I made sure that the Wi-Fi is broken on it,
Mm-hmm.
so it can't phone home anymore to somebody.
Well, also your printer's in your private home, so in that scenario, and it's not on the internet, then you don't need to bother with secure print, because something else happens with secure print is sometimes people have poor penmanship.
Exactly.
They don't even know what they wrote down. So with secure print and with any backup, we recommend that before you actually put any Bitcoins into your wallet, that you test that backup and make sure. I say prove to yourself that you'll never have a problem restoring from the backup, and then once you're convinced, then go ahead and use the wallet.
Yeah, that's a great point, because we're probably more of a security risk to ourselves than somebody else trying to hack our Bitcoins.
Yeah, I don't know how you would figure this out, but I would bet that the amount of Bitcoins lost that are completely unspendable is quite a bit more than the amount of Bitcoins that have been stolen.
Yeah, that would not surprise me, because it's very, very easy for people to just screw up and send their Bitcoin somewhere where they can't get them out again. Let's talk about another feature, Shamir secret sharing. So what's actually going on with this Shamir secret sharing?
Well, the Shamir secret sharing is the cute little math trick that sits behind fragmented backups. And what's great about Shamir secret sharing is that it's an obscure concept, but boy, is it simple. It's not that hard to understand. As if you have if you've taken high school algebra and you ever wondered, well, geez, I'm never going to need this. Well, this is the day. This is the day. When, if you had paid attention in high school algebra, you can use that knowledge to understand Shamir secret sharing. If you can imagine, you have this private key, which is a number, and that number that's your secret. If anyone gets that secret, then it's all over, right? So that's a lot for one number. It'd probably be better if you had, say, 3 numbers, and you needed 2 of those 3 numbers. Now, certainly you could take a number like that and break it up into 3 pieces, but then you need all 3. And now you've got 3 ways to lose a number that will prevent you from ever spending your Bitcoins. But if you had 2 of 3, a 2 of 3 fragmented backup of your secret number, that would be, you only need 2 out of the 3 pieces, not 1, because if you only needed 1, somebody could very easily steal it. And you've tripled the size of your attack surface, right? Because there's 3 different numbers somebody could steal if you only needed 1. That would be like copying your private key into 3 pieces of paper. So, right, you've just tripled the attack surface. And if you needed all 3, then you've increased the amount of ways you could lose all your Bitcoins. Ideally, it would be 2 of 3, because then, right, if somebody finds one of your pieces of paper, then they can't steal your Bitcoins. Right. And if you lose one, you don't lose your Bitcoins. So to me, that's like ideal for just 3 pieces of paper. Now, the way it works with Shamir secret sharing is, if you imagine your private key is a point on a line, right? You can break that number up into 3 pieces, and you only need 2. And what you do is you make those three other numbers other points on the same line, right? And then if you have any two of those points, you can extend the line out to find your private key. And that's exactly how it works.
So yeah, so Kevin, who also invested in Armory, it was so funny because we were talking. It was before we had funded it, and he was like, you know what? When I was at Harvard, and Kevin went to Harvard for computer science, he's like, when I was at Harvard, I was in one of my computer science classes, and the professor was explaining this concept of Shamir secret sharing, and I remember thinking to myself, when is this ever going to be used? This is the most worthless piece of junk that I'm having to learn. And he was like, but it is implemented so elegantly in Armory, and it's so useful that like it's just awesome. So
what's amazing about it is if you see how it's implemented, then any computer science student in their first year could be a homework assignment. It's not that hard to do.
Right. And here's a real life example of how this could have been used. I was reading a thread on Reddit, and there's a kid. His dad was an early Bitcoin adopter, but I think the kid is the son was the one who secured all the Bitcoins, and he had done it with paper wallets. Right, and so he had the same paper wallet in the safe, and another copy in the safety deposit box, and I think those were the two backups. Well, guess what happened? Somebody broke into his dad's house and loaded the safe up, like pulled it out of the ground and drove off with it in a truck, and the bank didn't open for another 9 hours.
I heard the story, yeah.
And so if he didn't use this fragmented backups solution in Armory, so he's just waiting on pins and needles, hoping that they can't drill into the safe and take those Bitcoins because he can't get into his safety deposit box for another 9 hours. But
hopefully the thieves don't even know they're in a race.
Right. Yeah. Well, and from what I understand, he actually did get the backup from the safety deposit box and got the Bitcoins moved before they got compromised. But this would have been a perfect example of where this concept of the fragmented backups in Armory could have been very, very helpful, right? Because they could have stolen the safe, but it would have only had one of two. There might have been 3 fragments in the backup, and you need any 2 of them, but only one of them would have been in the safe, right?
Right.
So he could have, the safe could have got ripped up out of the cement, drug out of his garage, and yet he could sleep without even any worry at all, because they wouldn't have been able to compromise the Bitcoins had he used this fragmented backups feature. Right. Yeah. So this is, it's, and we should also distinguish this fragmented backups is completely different from multi-signature.
Right. A lot of people hear 2 of 3 and they think, oh, that's like multi-sig. Well, I mean, on the surface, it sounds a little bit like multi-sig, but it's actually quite different. And there's one key difference between, Shamir secret sharing and fragmented backups and multi-sig. And that is there is a single point of failure. That is when you get your private keys when you get your fragments together to recover your private key. Well, now you've got one single point of failure. With multi-sig, you're actually signing transactions with multiple signatures. And all of those signatures are never required to be in the same place. I mean, all those private keys, they can each sign, whereas multi-sig is much better for having secure transactions that require multiple signatures, because those private keys, each necessary component to sign a transaction, can stay separate. And that is much more useful, actually, for day-to-day use.
Yeah, because one could be your your smartphone, one could be your online computer, one could be your offline computer, and it could require 2 of 3 on the multi-signature, and then 2 devices would have to be compromised. So, so there we go. We've talked about root seeds, cold storage, watching only wallets, secure print, Samir's secret sharing, how we can use these fragmented backups. Oh, one last feature we should probably talk about. Like, what's the difference between a private key import and a private key sweep when we're bringing Bitcoins into Armory?
Well, when you do an import, you're actually taking the private key with the Bitcoins that are associated with it in. You're actually bringing that private key into your wallet. Now, that private key is not recoverable through your root key. It's separate, but it can be considered part of your wallet. And when you import private keys, you do need to back those up either separately or create a new backup, which includes your root key and all of your private keys, including the new ones. So it's really not the most convenient way, not the easiest way to bring external Bitcoins into your wallet. A much better way.
If you use the import, you also have all of the security risks that those private keys had before they even came into Armory, right?
Right. Well, you're expanding your attack surface to whatever those private keys were on before. So wherever your private keys have been, I always say, if you get one of our promo wallets, don't use it. You don't know where those keys have been.
Well, they've been at least with Armory Technologies.
Right, exactly. So, when you get one of our promo wallets, that's a perfect example. You don't import those keys. You should sweep them. And what that means is you just take whatever Bitcoins are in those private keys and send them into a private key. Well, send them to a public key for which you have the private key in your wallet and the security level of that private key.
And that's a new private key that's been generated by that specific instance of Armory that you're running.
Right.
So it's brand new, it's clean, it doesn't have any history associated with it. Much more secure than a private key import.
Right. But, there are purposes for which you really want to import a key. Perhaps you have a vanity address, which, has the name of your company in it, and you use that to collect donations or receive payments from people. And you don't want to give that up, but you also want to have it in your wallet so you can track it and use the funds that are in it. So certainly you would import such a private key. Now, the whole point of this is to say, look, we have this import feature, but the only time you need to know exactly why you're importing it rather than sweeping it. And if you have a good reason to import it, then go ahead. It's fine. Just understand that generally it's not as good as sweeping.
Yep. Okay, well, wonderful. That should be just about it for episode 101. We've had Andy from Armory Technologies, developer of the Armory wallet, and we've been talking all about wallets in this episode. And so thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you, Trace.
Be sure to get a copy of the free Bitcoin Guide at freebitcoinguide.com. Got a question or suggestion? Record your voice at bitcoin.kn. Don't be shy. To help the show, share bitcoin.kn with friends, post about it on Reddit, and otherwise spam the interwebs. Your iTunes comments and 5-star reviews are very important to us. Please continue tuning in to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, where we release interviews with the top people in the Bitcoin world. Now take some choline and let that Bitcoin knowledge consolidate.